Hello, and thank you for joining me today in talking about Think Global but Act Local. My name is Rick Kaun. I'll be walking you through a little bit of what we think is a modern or a forward-looking way of managing OT or ICS security. To do that, I want to give a quick introduction to who we are, who I am, who the companies that I work for, what we think the current situation looks a little bit like, and then describe for you what Think Global, Act Local is. And then I want to bring a few real world case studies. Yes, plural. I've got more than one sort of angle to share with you. And then sort of highlight the benefits and share the conclusions with you. I hope that this gives you some ideas, and it gets you to think a little bit, and that you enjoy your time here with us today. I appreciate you giving me half an hour of your time. So without further ado, the introduction. Verve Industrial Protection is the company that I work for. We were founded 30 years ago as a systems integrator. We have been doing OT automation engineering for 30 years. So we know what you can and can't do in the OT space. We're not simply a venture capital funding or a research lab. We are actually boots on the ground in OT. And over that time, we built reusable tools for the operational or ICS environments. Everything I'm talking about today has been proven in OT for over 13 years. In other words, our technology and our approach has been deployed in one manner or another in different industry verticals around the world for almost 13 years now. Today, we're a fully integrated solutions provider, and that's a nod to the fact that security is a program. It's not simply a tool or a technology. It's not a collection of tools even. It's the ability to gather data and information together and to use it in a meaningful way. I always say that it's people that are guided and empowered by process and procedure, but that are aided by technology. Starting with technology gets a little bit backwards and doesn't necessarily guarantee risk reduction or security improvement. I myself, my name is Rick Kaun. I'm the VP of Solutions for Verve Industrial. I've actually been doing ICS or OT security projects, consulting, plan design, program rollouts, etc. For over 20 years. I used to work for Matricon, which did a lot of both OPC connectivity as well as alarm management, loop tuning, process improvements, plant improvement sort of things. And then we got bought by Honeywell. And I had the fortunate opportunity to occupy a global role, having been able to see many sizes and shapes of security programs around the world in multiple industry verticals, from very large oil and gas to mom and pop pulp and paper and forestry facilities in many of the continents. I also have significant experience in NERC-CIP. That's really just a nod to the fact that some industries have struggled with the shall we regulate and what does that look like. It doesn't mean that NERC-CIP is applicable to anyone necessarily on this call, but the lessons learned for an industry around how maintenance and management of these types of programs can be huge if not thoughtfully planned out, I think is a very important input to our discussion today. And I always try to provide vendor agnostic, holistic programs. Simply solving one of your problems or a problem on one of your vendor label OEMs isn't necessarily enough. So what are we dealing with? Well, what we see, and again, going back to the NERC-CIP draw, simply because they've been around for many years, NERC-CIP, I started doing NERC-CIP consulting and being on working groups as far back as, I don't know, 2007 or 8, maybe even earlier than that. And one of the things we find is that there's always a challenge to maintain the current approach. It's a very significant challenge. Things like patch review, configuration management, logging, because we can't do it universally and we can't do it automatically, we struggle to keep up with a best practice that's manual or ad hoc or situational. We're also confronted in this space with a number of IP addresses and assets continuing to grow. We have clients that think they know their inventory, and when we go in and work with them, we find they're often off by sometimes even as much as 500 or 600%. And regulatory reporting standards. Again, NERC-CIP is the only purely enforced at the moment, but we're starting to see more and more push in EMEA and in APAC around thou shalt have at least an inventory and understand vulnerabilities. And so we're starting to see the emergence in different industry verticals as well. Now, many organizations that have already started have what we call disparate solutions in different areas. What that means is different vendors require different tools, and we can't really come in and say, vendor A expects antivirus A and backup A, whilst vendor X expects these other different ones. We can't make them use each other's necessarily. We could. The technology is usually pretty universally swappable. But the challenge to you, the owner, is that you often have multiple of these, and how do you make sense between the different interfaces and get a consistent understanding of what your backups look like or your antivirus, for example. Segmentation may not be consistent. Vulnerability scans. Everybody wanting to know vulnerabilities either does a passive listen and hope they get enough information, or they do vulnerability with scan-based vulnerability, but only on a subset of assets and under controlled conditions, both of which open you up to significant risk. There's way more latent risk in the OT environment than a scan or a passive tool can actually tell you about. Security maintenance, as I mentioned, is often best effort. And the organizational view, it's different reporting and management for different sites. Consistency is elusive. So what do we recommend? Well, we think you can get, we've seen that you can get at least a 70 to 80% reduction in cost and effort with a think global, act local approach. Now, we say we think you can get 70 because I bet you haven't measured how much you're doing now and how much it takes and how far you're missing the mark. So any improvement would be infinitely better. But nonetheless, we've seen a step change in the ability to understand risk, to remediate it, to react to it, to report on it, and to be able to sometimes just accept it. And what it is that we use a thing called think global and act local. So the think global is an impetus or a design or an architecture whereby we take multiple data, right? And we advocate an automated inventory. We use agents and agentless to go right to the endpoint. I can tell everything about an endpoint if I'm resident on it. It's not invasive. You're putting Acronis and Avamar agents on them. You're putting antivirus and agents on them. You're putting all sorts of, whitelisting agents. It's simply a tiny little piece of software that runs on the endpoint, but because it's there and it's resident, it knows everything about the endpoint. We couple that with agentless data collection for PLCs and relays, things that can't take an agent. And what we do is we automate that data collection. So it's not a one-time snapshot, it's a regular update of data. We add other context to it, like not only the assets IP and MAC address, installed software and users, but the other indicators. So those multiple antivirus tools you have or multiple backups, we pull them all in and give you, yes, the antivirus is up to date, or yes, the backup ran successfully. We also map vulnerabilities offline. Once I build this database, I have a database of all my assets. I can then map all vulnerabilities to my entire database, thereby checking vulnerabilities on everything without scanning anything, and then doing it offline from operations. We also put tribal knowledge, or what we call metadata, in there. So asset criticality, asset location, assets redundancy, and all of this data comes to a small, centralized, specialized team. This aggregation of data allows for this smaller team to act and research once and share it across multiple facilities. Now, that's the think global. The act local is when we need to do something. So for example, if you had to do an update to a vendor's software, let's pick Wonderware. Not that Wonderware is particularly difficult or troublesome, but if they said, hey, we have a new update, it's got a security update, you probably should do it. At the corporate level in this environment, you'd be able to see how many of them you had, and you'd be able to create an action through that agent and through that data collection to say, I want, if you have this version of Wonderware, to install this update. Now, this is where we stop automating. We can automate the research, we can automate the aggregation of data, we can automate even the deployment of the patch file or the installation file to all of the endpoints, but we stop short of doing anything. We instead set a flag on that command and we say, I want this technician at this facility to stand in front of this console to accept that command. So we're effectively streamlining the research, the prep work, the file transfer, and we are giving, however, last mile oversight to boots on the ground OT. That's the act local. It is a very significant difference from what is done today. It requires of convergence of specialty skill sets up here to know what you're doing, but very regional and system specific ownership and knowledge of the assets. And it is the fastest way to the best possible risk reduction. Let me walk through a few examples of how that actually works. So I sort of alluded to a lot of this a minute ago. Agentless data collection, integration points, and other contexts. So this could be connecting to your McAfee, your Symantec, your Acronis, your Avamar, your Tripwire, your Carbon Black, you're bringing the National Vulnerability Database into this database layer. This is where we build the 360-degree view of the asset, and we can have one or many of these push to a single reporting. I've got a couple of architecture slides in a minute I'll show you. No matter your size, the same concept works. The reporting is read-only. It's what aggregates all the different sites and all the different data and lets us do our understanding, right? And all these benefits, right, about agent enabling real-time visibility, asset manager allowing for inclusion of context data, all of this builds that rich, informed view that lets me say, okay, I've got a critical risk on an asset, but this particular asset has a whitelisting and lockdown. It has a recent backup, and it's in layer 2 of the zone 2 of the Purdue model, far away from the DMZ. And by the way, it's a network-based attack vector. So the likelihood of a highly complex network-based attack vector hitting a low impact asset in zone 2 of the Purdue model allows me to probably accept that risk rather than trying to patch it. And that's the value that you can do not only on a single asset by asset basis, but across your entire fleet. And then as you take actions, either through the agent, or you could go do it with the other tools like your antivirus or rerun and backup, because we have this automatic feedback and we're regularly refreshing these connections to the data, we get a near real-time view in this space, thereby allowing the people at the top to always be reacting and measuring exactly where we are and reacting to new emerging threats, but also being able to build activities and actions to reduce our risk. So taken together, what does that look like? We believe you need an automatic update. You can't just do a point in time on inventory or any of these tools. You build an automated inventory upon which you build asset context. And the context includes not just the asset's criticality or place in the process, where it is physically or who the owner is. It also includes what vulnerabilities, patches, and configurations are on that device. What dormant users do we have? Dormant users are not transmitted. People are not using them to log in. They don't traverse the network. You'll never pick them up. But if you have dormant administrative accounts on endpoints, that's a land and expand for for malicious software users. The status, the context of anti-malware or antivirus, as well as your backup status, right? And its context again in the network. Where is it in different segments and layers of the network? You take that context with the ability to take actions, which is where you actually correct some of these risks. And then you add alerting and finally reporting to track how you're doing. Reporting shows you as you apply patches or as you apply compensating controls in the form of disabling ports and services in lieu of patching. And it shows that your big red list of things that need to be done relative to the Blue Keep slowly start to chug away as you move on. And Blue Keep is actually one of my case studies. So architecturally, what does that look like? You could have a single facility. You could be a small single location and the entire stack could sit in your environment. The data collection sits in the subnets and on the environments themselves, connects to very safe. Again, we've been doing this 13 years. I can take you through all that in another session if you're curious. We connect to relays, PLCs, controllers, networking gear, etc., with agentless profiling, very smart profiling, supported by the actual vendor language and communications and protocols. We put agents on the OSs, engineering stations, HMIs, and that all collectively pushes back into the central aggregation point. If you're a mom and pop, you have one database, you push it outbound. You can even put this through a data diode if you'd like at this point here. But the point is you have this read-only view at the top that lets you look at all the information, and here's when you can take actions back down. But again, have somebody stand at the console if you'd like. If you're a larger organization, you have a bigger remit than that. Well, we have the same concept holds, just in a slightly different scale. In this case, we could have cloud-based regional representation for the database. The actual agents and agentless sit at the environments in different regions around the world. Those agents and agentless data still push to the same database, only this time these are regionally centered to support multiple facilities in various territories and geographies. And then multiple of these, again, still report to a single reporting. We have a client at both ends of the spectrum. The smaller one, we have a client that's a power client, small little utility co-op in a small town. They've got the whole stack on-prem. We have also got a client at this end of the spectrum where the corporate reporting and the cloud-based, and the database are also put in their private leased cloud. We're not a on-prem or a cloud-based. Whatever your organization needs, we can adapt to that. But in this case, they are operating from virtual control centers. And so the databases are also in those same virtual clouds. And then the individual sites roll up into it. So whether you have one site or 600 sites, the same premise holds true. Let's walk through a couple of examples of what the benefit is. Okay. So the first one, let's say you don't do whitelisting today, but you want to. And this is a very real possibility. And this is a client that I worked with that does have 40 sites. which is larger than some, but it shows a large order of magnitude. And obviously, the percentage difference is the same. Obviously, the repetitive of more sites isn't necessarily true for everybody. But he wanted to roll out whitelisting. And the traditional way he would do it is he would install a whitelisting server in corporate. And then he would have the agents in a share at each of the individual factories. And then he would network a remote desktop into that factory one at a time. And he would grab the installation files from the local file share, and he would point them to the different systems, and he would go ahead and make sure that they installed and pointed back to the corporate IP and had all the information ready. Maybe he scripted a little bit of it, but he effectively was able to do one facility about a week. It didn't take all 40 hours necessarily, but to get in, do a project kickoff, to work with the local team, to manually install the different systems, to tune them, make sure they pointed back. And then if they had to make changes, had to change them one by one, or else rewrite a script, etc. The idea was that manually he would take 8 hours to centrally set up a configure, a virtual box with the host information. He would take about 1 week per facility times 42 weeks. That's 1,700 hours. And then tuning was about 4 weeks of tuning after the fact to let whitelisting bake in and take care of it. In all, he probably spent an entire man year of effort or woman year of effort, about 2,000 hours, to do proper whitelisting with lockdown at 42 sites. Now, that's a big project, and that sounds like a reasonable amount of hours. Put a couple people at it, maybe you can go faster, maybe you can save some corners here and there from learning lessons learned. But the order of magnitude change with this type of technology, you simply put into the database, if you have these versions of OS, here's your install file. All of the agents simultaneously pull them down. Now, we can also have the agent act as a relay in a subnet, so you only bring it down once and then submit locally. So don't worry about bandwidth. Again, these are all proven OT safe. You'd go ahead and you'd pull it down, and it would deploy almost simultaneously. Or again, you let each of the sites know it's time to go and accept that command. And we're effectively automating 90% of the manual effort to grab and pull and push and install and hit next, next, next. The difference is we can do 4 plants per day. And this is a very slow and staged approach, not necessarily simultaneous. We start in the morning, we deploy it all at one site, we make sure everything's okay, nothing happens, they tune all in, we're great, we go to the next one. And we could do this in probably, we'd be able to do about 10 or 11 days, 88 hours. The cost savings, as you can see, it's almost 90% less, or it's almost 10x to get from automated to manual. Second case study, system hardening. Real world story. I have a client that hired one of the big OEMs to run around and do system hardening. They literally sent a guy to these sites, and they walked around, logged into the systems, did a bunch of different specific configurations, and then did a checklist to make sure it worked. They did a printout and filed the paperwork. Very, very manual. Again, across multiple systems, whether that's multiple sites or multiple systems, again, you can immediately see what's in control or what's configured or not. With this agent checking in, you just tell the agent, is the guest account disabled? And it will tell you universally across your entire fleet instantly. You can send a command back to say, disable the guest account. And all of them will, the next time they check in, confirm that they were able to disable that account. Same and so on across 30, 40, 50 different security parameters if you'd like. But it gives you very granular control. However, it gives you the ability to automate and consistently apply across the entire fleet. Again, you're seeing more than a 10x difference in savings here. I don't need to read you through the hours or have you check my math, but we're seeing that this type of approach, whether it's proactive in system rollout or reactive, which one of the case studies shows, is very significant. And this is an extra slide, so I'm going to jump to it because it's presented a little bit better here. Software removal, right? Without the global Think Global, Act Local program, somebody's asked to remove a certain type of software. We've decided to discontinue our support of this particular antivirus or that particular whitelisting or backup solution or loop tuning program or what have you. Step one typically is to determine where it exists. And without this automated approach, you're manually visiting the different sites or asking the plant personnel to do that, depending how busy they are, how complex, anywhere from an hour to 8 hours to get that list. And then being a little bit optimistic, I think, in the request of somebody randomly to find a list of information for head office. Step 2 would be to develop a procedure. Step 3, and explain it and walk the people through what we're doing and why. Step 3 would be remove the software and confirm the removal. 3 or 5 minutes per device per plan. I'm talking simply the ability to go uninstall, next, maybe reboot, maybe not. And the total time elapsed, depending on how much this takes and how long these are, how many devices, between 5 or 15 hours per plant, right? Assuming no travel to site to do these. It is prone to errors and omissions. You may not find all the devices. Maybe something doesn't quite work and you want to get it back up and move on and come back to it later, which often never does. And so it's not bad, but it's not ideal. The alternative with the global local program, you determine where the software exists. As soon as you go to the dashboard with this automated view, I can see across the fleet exactly what software exists on which system, what the system is, who owns it, and where it physically is. That takes maybe a minute or two. Step 2, developing the procedure to remove the software. Again, you build that removal with whatever checks and balances or messages you want on the screen. So if I'm going to automatically remove something because it doesn't require a reboot, I can put a little flash of sign that says, I'm about to uninstall software. Do you want to pause this? Let the operator say, yes, pause it. I don't want to know what that is. Or you could fully make it an offer. But that's built once and shared across every single asset. You build that command once and it's shared everywhere. Step 3, remove the software and confirm removal. Again, centrally structured, it's 3 to 5 minutes per plant. The total elapsed time, less than an hour. And this actually really happened. You can see this here. But a power company that had 12 sites, they were contracting us for 6 of them, and they had 6 with a different provider. The other provider was mostly doing professional services, managed services. They offered to scramble staff as needed to different sites and just do things manually. One day, the CISO requested the removal of a specific antivirus product. The manual sites took 3 weeks and many people, many hours. We were able, with this view, to identify, uninstall with OT oversight. We actually sent a list of systems to each and every of those 6 sites. And the technician at each site walked down to their 10 or 15 that made up the 150. And they saw the command in the system tray and said, yes, I'm okay with this. They supervised it, system came back up, everything's fine. We did all of that with OT oversight and reporting in only 90 minutes. It's a game changer with respect to actually not only achieving security in OT, but maintaining security. So the next slide, sorry, I pressed the wrong button. This is a really cool one for me. This is a before and after with Bluekeep. So the client profile here is a large operating company that had thousands of miles of assets to monitor, 200 plus, almost 300 individual physical facilities. They had a distributed team of SCADA and operational people, security and compliance members throughout North America. Thousands of assets comprised of varying everything from out of date, no longer supported Linux and Unix to newer Windows 10, et cetera. Thousands of PLCs, relays, et cetera. And many of the facilities were unmanned, right? Many are unmanned because they're just small. But if something goes wrong and you need a body, you need to dispatch somebody by snowmobile, by helicopter, by ATV, what have you. So not trivial to make mistakes in this space. Without the Think Global, Act Local program, what happened was that dozens of people were pulled into different meetings. They had multiple meetings, they had different spreadsheets from different bits of systems. They had some information about networking gear and what was attached to it from SolarWinds. They had some information from Maximo. They had some other information yet again from a CMDB, and trying to stitch together what they had, where there were duplicates, where there were things missing. They had many, many guesses and assumptions like system criticality or owner. At one point, I remember somebody being tasked, I was consulting this company at the time, somebody was being tasked with taking a subset of assets that nobody knew from their name what those systems did or who they belonged to. So they were actually tasked with logging into those systems and looking at the program files to see if they could figure out what software was running on it and maybe work backwards from there. The manual patch process begins. The manual tracking also began. All these spreadsheets had to somehow be updated. And the total effort was, it took them over 2,500 hours. And they had to divert 6 full-time staff from daily operational jobs. And it took a lapse time of over 10 weeks. The problem was, if they couldn't apply a patch, they simply left it and moved on. Now, with the program, because the same organization had a similar incident with another global sort of patch that was an issue. With the 360-degree view of the assets, they were able to get an accurate list of in scope by type, location, criticality, and owner simply by sitting at the console. That central team had that visibility across the fleet, and they knew almost instantly what they needed to do. The kickoff meeting then was a subset of the people. They knew exactly what they had and where they had it. The first task was disable remote desktop. They sent an email out to all field staff to say that for the next 24, 48, 72 hours, we're going to disable remote desktop as a universal standard. If you need access, let us know, and we can granularly open this one or that one for the hour or 2 hours that you need it for. And so they notified the operational team what was going on and what was happening. While they were planning, they were able to preload the patch files. So using the very low bandwidth distributed sort of architecture, they were able to preload files on all the systems in scope, regardless of whether they were going to be done immediately, whether they're going to be done automatically, whether they're going to not be done at all. They had that prep work done, and it was filtering through in the background while they were in the room planning. They then started to test on, again, redundant domain controllers in the DMZ, which they could easily extract from their inventory list, as opposed to high impact HMIs or engineering stations overseeing certain safety programs, for example. And then they started to roll technicians to higher risk assets so that they could in parallel be testing here. By the time that guy got there, work with them to get it done. And it's really a testament to that IT and OT coming together with a small team and automation guiding the actual activities. All progress was reported in live dashboards, and the total effort was only 3 staff. Oops, I apologize, jumped ahead. Was only 3 staff, plus field techs as needed, and less than 600 hours. And they reached 90%. Again, with the automated capabilities for the systems they left remote desktop turned off. If they didn't need it, there wasn't a business need for it, they simply took away that particular attack vector. So you can see that whether it's proactive in the form of system hardening and monitoring and managing your life cycle, your system health, your software, or whether it's reactive in the face of emerging risks, there's a significant benefit to this type of growth across multiple case studies. So what are the benefits? Just turn into the home stretch here. We're going to wrap this up. Benefits of this approach. Cost is greatly reduced. Automation saves time and increases accuracy. Being able to look at a list of risks and know that the ones that are important are handled and the ones that don't really apply or are lower risk than what the raw score is because of these compensating controls and placement in the network, et cetera, is huge. The central view and the automated action leverage very scarce resources. So one of the biggest challenges we see people have today is, if I'm going to turn all this stuff on, how am I going to maintain it? I can barely get enough staff to run the plant. Now I got to do all these nice to have security things on top of it. This absolutely minimizes it while maximizing the visibility and maximizing your granularity of control. OT and IT are on the same team making decisions, and OT has the last mile. They get to do the oversight. There's no automatic actions unless it's certain things on certain assets, or maybe never. But you can, from an organizational perspective, have an informed discussion about what is or is not allowed by automation versus what is required for plant floor and in the actual operating facilities. More importantly, provides context. I can't say enough. I can show you 20,000 vulnerabilities in your environment. Not all 20,000 are going to bring you to your knees. But if I could show you the critical risk on high impact assets that don't have a recent backup or that they don't have whitelisting and lockdown, that's where you need to go spend your time. And that's where this Think Global view can help you root out those individual risks, those really high, bring you to your knees type of risks in the sea of noise that lets you take action and really proactively reduce risk and protect your organization. And most importantly, the tracking. That view is very powerful, whether it's patch, whether it's vulnerability, whether it's lifecycle planning. We have clients using it to pull out how many Windows 7 and Server 2008 systems they have that they need to negotiate extended patch support for or put onto an upgrade cycle to refresh the hardware. So that's my conclusion. That is my speech. My name is Rick Kaun. I'm the VP of Solutions for Verve. I've been doing this for a while, and I, of course, have a few opinions. Would love to hear yours. Any questions, any comments? There, of course, is my email and phone number. You can also get to us on the web. We have a newsletter. We post a large amount of materials on emerging events, but also in our own developments and learnings and efforts. Would love to hear your feedback. Would love to hear your story, and would love to answer your questions if you have any. So once again, I hope this was worth your time. I really appreciate you sharing a part of your day with me, and I hope you learned something here today. And I challenge you to throw me a question or a comment about what you learned today or what you'd like to hear more about. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Enjoy the rest of the conference.